What's going on, guys, and welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the latest episode of Table for Three, featuring John Laurinaitis, Bruce Pritchard, and Shane McMahon, an episode called Mealing and Dealing. So, when I saw this was advertised for the network after Raw this past week, I'm thinking, what is this episode even about? Because I'm trying to wonder, what's the chemistry here? Not really the chemistry, but what's really the connection between these three men? And even based off the title, there's really no, usually the title of these episodes, like the last one, Appetite for APA, with JBL, Teddy Long, and Ron Simmons. I knew that Ron Simmons had history with both JBL and Teddy Long, so it made sense. Or with Eric Bischoff, Kurt Angle, and Vicky Guerrero. I'm thinking, what's the connection there? And then the name of the episode was General Manager Special. So I'm like, okay, they're talking about their GM stints in WWE. So I'm wondering, what's the connection here with John Laurinaitis, Bruce Pritchard, and Shane McMahon? And as soon as the episode started, I realized this was all about the day that WWE purchased WCW back in March of 2001. March 26th, 2001 to be exact. And then I'm like, okay, so this makes sense because Bruce Pritchard was in the office at that point for WWE. John Laurinaitis had previously been in WWE, but then soon got hired by Eric Bischoff for a very brief stint right before WCW closed. And then, of course, Shane was in WWE at that point and was involved in the buyout and storyline of WCW, and his name was on the contract, and he was feuding with his dad, Vince, going into WrestleMania 17 that Sunday. So all three of these men played a very integral part in the buyout of WCW. Probably three of the most important people involved in that angle, or really the entire, not the storyline, but the actual buyout of the company, excluding Vince, of course. But this episode of Table for Three does take place over WrestleMania 35 weekend, we found out. They said that at the very start of the show. So I assume that a lot like all these other episodes, this was filmed over Mania weekend, and it's just airing now, even though Mania weekend was 7 months ago. But better late than never, I guess. They all talk about when they met. John Laurinaitis apparently met Shane McMahon at a Gold's Gym, I forgot which one he said, in Boston many, many years ago. Shane said that he met Bruce back in 1987 at Vince's house, actually. And Shane talked about how, I guess one of his first jobs was becoming a brick mason. And one of the jobs his company had to do was putting in the brick for the house that Vince and Linda bought at a certain point in Greenwich many, many years ago, which is pretty funny. And then Bruce and John said that they met, Bruce and John Laurinaitis said that they met in WWE in the early 90s. John said that he was in WCW for only about 8 months. He was hired by Eric Bischoff because, according to John Laurinaitis, Eric wanted Pat Patterson, so the next best thing was John Laurinaitis. So he kind of compares himself to Pat Patterson, which is funny, which Bruce and Shane get a kick out of. So Bruce recalls the Monday Night Wars and said that buying WCW was a very quick process. And Bruce Pritchard is absolutely one to trust if you don't listen to his podcasts and stuff like that. I mean, the guy was involved in WWE for so long. He was like the right-hand man to Vince McMahon for so long that he knows all the stories. If you've listened to his podcast, you would be well aware that the guy has a lot of knowledge of what went on in WWE around that point for as long as he was there for. And the guy's back in the company now, so I can't wait for all the stories from the modern-day WWE product when he eventually leaves down the road. But anyway, he talks about how Vince had said at one point that he didn't really want anything from WCW. WCW was up for sale for a while before WWE eventually bought it out. And Vince even asked, what is there for us to get from WCW? That's probably the question, honestly, that he asks now. What's the point of buying Impact Wrestling? What's the point of buying Ring of Honor? What do we get out of it? Because what we want, we can't have. People like Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Goldberg, Sting, Ric Flair, all of those guys were off limits. They couldn't get them if they bought WCW right out of the gate because of their contracts. So they're asking themselves, what do we even get out of this except for the TV library? So that was appealing, and obviously this was well before the WWE Network. But other than that, what do we really get out of buying WCW? So because of that, Shane, which I never knew about this is probably documented elsewhere, but Shane said that they said no initially. When the offer first came to them about buying WCW, they said no. They said, we don't want it. So then it went down the line of, investor after investor of investor after investor, and all these people said no as well. So when it came back to Vince McMahon, when it came back to WCW, back to WWE, in terms of WCW being up for sale, Shane said, and Bruce reiterated it, that it was literally pennies on a dollar at that point in terms of how much WCW was worth. It's like you see something online that you really, really want, and it's really expensive, but it's too expensive and you're not really going to get much use out of it, so why buy it? You pass. All the other people are kind of thinking the same thing. They don't want it either. So when you check back a couple weeks later, it's like half the price, or, 3/4 down to the price that it was initially. And you're like, holy shit, this is a hell of a deal. I'll buy it now, So that's what they ended up doing. And they also talked about that there's a lot of issues with buying WCW as well, because there's a lot of people that they couldn't bring in initially because their contract stated that they would have creative control of their characters. People like Hogan, obviously, and Nash, and Hall, and many, many others. These people had it built into their WCW contracts, which was a shit show towards the end, that they had creative control. And Vince is like, well, that's not fucking happening, because obviously if we allowed that to happen, the locker room would be in shambles. So we can't bring those people in initially anyway because of the contracts they currently have. So they had to think about that aspect of it. And Bruce also said that WCW really wasn't what they were eyeing from the get-go. What they were eyeing initially was ECW, because ECW was also kind of up for sale. They were dying out. They were losing money. So they were also looking to absorb ECW at that point as well. And Paul Heyman, who was sitting in on these meetings, about ECW being bought out, he called WCW. He's like, well, I don't want ECW being sold. Let's buy WCW. Or maybe not. He was like, well, WCW is a dead brand. There's no real worth in buying it, blah, 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 which I thought was funny. And Bruce said that when it came back around for them to buy I'm getting the two companies mixed up here. When the offer came back around for WWE to buy out WCW, what really appealed to them was having an additional show on TBS or TNT. Because part of the deal originally was that they could have another show airing, like a SmackDown, which I think ended up happening not on TNT. I don't remember. I know they were on Spike for a while, years later. I think Raw was even on Spike at this point, from 2000 to 2005. I'm not sure. Where did SmackDown air initially? UPN? I don't remember. And SmackDown was already a thing, but either way, they wanted the additional show on TBS or TNT. That was really valuable real estate right there. But they also had plenty of other things going on around that point. At the time that WCW was bought out, they also had the XFL, was happening around then. WrestleMania 17 was about to happen that Sunday. And Vince was adamant about not allowing the wrestling side of his company to suffer while he had all these other projects going on, WCW, buying them out, WrestleMania 17, XFL more importantly. He didn't really want to let the WWE side of things slip through his fingers. And I assume that's why when XFL is brought back next year, that WWE, nothing will change. I know the guy's 70-something now, and it's going to be almost impossible for him to manage both WWE and XFL at the level he currently is. But I don't think that mindset has changed. I really don't. I think it'll remain the same, that Vince is really going to want to be all hands-on, as much as hands-on as he is right now with WWE. I don't think that's going to change, even after XFL comes to fruition in early 2020. But anyway, we were told here that Vince informed everyone in his office that the week of that they were purchasing WCW, that the deal was going down. He told them the week of. So John Laurinaitis said it was a really quick process. It went from, hey, we're not interested, to, hey, we might have some interest, to, hey, we're buying it. Literally all within 2 days. Shane, Bruce, and John all said it was a 2-day process. It went from, hey, we're not buying it, to, yeah, fuck it, let's do it. John said that WCW had, they had no idea. They had no idea they were being closed until they were told by Shane and those other people. So Vince apparently ordered Shane to go to WCW to inform the talent of the buyout, probably the day of the Nitro on March 26th, that Monday, right before WrestleMania 17. They probably knew WCW was having issues, but they didn't know that WWE was buying it out until Shane told them. So Shane talks about how he saw all the different reactions around the room, from sadness to maybe not happiness, but about some of these people going to WWE, but a lot of anger and stuff like that. And he said that only John Laurinaitis and the lawyers knew about what was going to be said in the meeting that day. But I do have to add this, though, because I saw this online before the episode aired on Monday. And I also saw Dave Pesner back this up on Twitter, the old WCW ring announcer. And obviously he would know because he was there, that a press release went out. And I saw someone tweet out the link to the press release, so they're not bullshitting here. There was a press release that went out the day before, that Sunday, from WWE's corporate website, and it's still up now because the link was active when I saw it on Twitter, that said WWE bought out WCW. So the whole notion that it was Shane being the one to break the news to the WCW talent that WWE was buying them out was bullshit, because they probably already knew at that point. I'm not doubting the meeting happened, but I'm doubting the fact that was the first time they had heard of them being bought out by WWE. They probably didn't know before the press release, but they definitely knew by the time that supposed meeting took place on that Monday before Nitro. So I just really wanted to back that up. But they also talked about the security being there and how they were just there because they didn't know what was going to happen. Shane thought, listen, there's going to be a lot of people that might be angry, and we don't know what's going to go down, so let's have security just in case someone flips out or tries to beat us up or whatever. You never know. And they also joked about how people thought that the security guards, they thought it was officials. They thought these people were officials. So the talent went up to them, like pitching their gimmicks and stuff like that. And it was really funny because Bruce and Shane had told the security, hey, don't tell anyone that you're security because some people might think that something's up. So it was really kind of a sketchy situation, to be honest with you. But I guess that was what had to happen in order to keep this thing under wraps until Shane had revealed it, supposedly in this meeting, but whatever. Bruce also talked about that Jeff Jarrett found out while he was watching Raw that night, because Raw was airing simultaneously with Nitro, when Vince opened up the show and it said that Jeff Jarrett, he spells his name Jeffj, blah, blah, blah. You know, he's going to start spelling his name GOONNE, gone. Basically implying that after buying WCW, that that Jeff Jarrett was fired. You know, he was not going to be one of the people being brought over. So I guess Jeff Jarrett, who was sitting right next to Bruce Pritchard, reacted to this by saying, well, I guess I can go now because I don't have a job currently. And then obviously TNA was founded about a year later. But anyway, I thought that was funny. So they discussed the simulcast with Nitro and Raw airing that night. And John said that he was told that WWE would need the last 12 minutes of Nitro for this angle to play out with Shane arriving in Panama City to inform the audience and the WCW fans, whatever, that Nitro was, or rather WCW was now his. It was in his possession because his name was on the contract. Obviously, all that was bullshit and storyline. But Shane could sense that the crowd was shocked and that no one knew until he said it that night, even though the press release went out the day before, but again, whatever. But anyway, so John Laurinaitis talked about how he was hit up by a bunch of questions that day from talent about what does my future hold? Am I going to WWE? What about my contract? And even he didn't know what his own future held. And he thought he was going back to Japan. He was kind of preparing for a return to Japan at that point because he thought he wouldn't be brought in by WWE, which I'm pretty sure he was right out of the gate, which is where he's been for the last, 20 years. I don't know if he's as involved with WWE now as he was 10 years ago as the VP of Talent Relations. He's not doing that anymore. But he is still with the company as far as I know. Maybe not as important of a role, but he is still there doing something, I guess, as a producer. I don't know. But anyway, Pritchard talked about how he came up with the Flair versus Sting match, and Sting was asking him, well, what do we do? And Pritchard was like, or maybe Shane told him, I don't remember. But they told him, like, listen, you guys have had a million matches. Just go out there and do what you know how to do best. And Flair, even though he wasn't active at that point, still agreed to do the match. And that was the last match ever on Nitro before the angle played out with Shane buying WCW. So Shane also talked about meeting Sting that day for the first time, which was cool. And John Laurinaitis called the day a whirlwind. But he also said it was cool to be involved in that takeover with WWE buying out WCW. It was a very interesting period to be a part of WWE and WCW for. And Pritchard called it one of the biggest days in the business, which it is, absolutely. The day the business died, essentially. Between that and WrestleMania 17, the very next weekend, which was highly regarded as, really, in my opinion, the end of the Attitude Era, for as amazing as that show is, highly regarded as one of the greatest WrestleManias of all time, which I'm not disputing. But the whole Stone Cold Steve Austin heel turn was what killed the Attitude Era. Both that and the death of WCW officially, a lot of those fans tuned out and never came back. So, for better or for worse, that was one of, if not the biggest day in the business. Shane said that it was vindication for Vince to buy out WCW after competing with them for so long. But they also started the question, how can we keep things exciting? So now that we're number one, how can we stay fresh? Where do we go from here? How can we keep things exciting? Which is a question they still struggle with even 18 years later, because they're absolutely right. Even Vince was thinking at that point, now that we don't have competition, how can we stay exciting? And the product was great for a while, and it still is now to a certain extent, but it's not the same as it was 20 years ago, and the competition was as heavy as it was with WCW. Obviously, now they have AEW, and that's probably the closest we'll ever come to having a true competitor, a true alternative to WWE, but it's not the same rating-wise. I mean, AEW is barely pulling in as many viewers as, just over as many viewers as NXT does. So for it to ever be in the level of Raw is, a question mark. I don't think it ever will be, but in terms of quality, it's certainly rivaling it, but it's certainly rivaling it, but it's a different time than it was 18 years ago with the place that WCW had on television, even at that point. For as bad as the show is still pulling in some pretty strong ratings compared to what we see today with Dynamite and even NXT, Raw, and SmackDown. But anyway, Bruce said that they're all back in the company to a certain extent 18 years later, and now they've since become working associates. So that's how we close out this episode of Table for Three, entitled Mealing and Dealing with John Laurinaitis, Bruce Pritchard, and Shane McMahon. A very enlightening episode of Table for Three. Not the usual, chitter chatter, nice to see you, blah, 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 which is nice. But this is actually an informative episode of Table for Three that I enjoyed a lot and learned a lot from. That a lot of stuff that I probably should have known, that has probably been documented elsewhere that I just didn't already know. So I thought it was a very good episode. Check it out right now on the WWE Network under the Table for Three section under Originals. So until next time, guys, be sure to check out all the other content here on the channel. Today's Tuesday, so tomorrow, a new hashtag AskGSM. Thursday, Wrestle Rant Radio excerpts. Friday, Total Divas review. Saturday, my SmackDown review. And on Sundays and Mondays, you can check out other miscellaneous content, including old episodes, full episodes of Wrestle Rant Radio, and even old interviews I've conducted. Yesterday, I posted my interview with my exclusive interview with current WWE superstar, maybe not for long, Sin Cara, which was completely coincidental, by the way. I posted that on Monday morning, found out no more than 2 or 3 hours later that he had asked for his release that same day from WWE. So, again, that was completely coincidental. The only type of content you'll get here, you'll only get that type of content right here on the channel. So subscribe today, like this video, drop a comment, and share the video as well. All support of the show is greatly appreciated. And I think after Survivor Series, and not this Sunday, but the Sunday after that, we're getting the debut of the new Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast-esque show on the network with The Undertaker, which you can bet your ass I'll be watching and reviewing for network and show when that time comes in a little under 2 weeks. So until then, guys, have a great rest of your week. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.